people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Fernando Martinez versus Derwin Ancajas II. Let's talk about the fight. Derwin, the former IBF champion, he started this fight off well enough, sticking and moving and trying to stay on the outside, not making himself a stationary target for Fernando. Fernando, who looked a bit limited at times, very square, though still very game, very much switched on, determined to catch up to and keep on his man, outwork him, outmuscle him. You know, the thing about Fernando is, while he might be a year older than Derwin Ancajas, he's a lot fresher than Derwin. Derwin Ancajas, the former champion, is a veteran of 37 professional contests, 37 professional bouts. Whereas Fernando, he's a bit of a late starter in the pros, 31 years old with a professional record of 14 wins, 0 losses, and 0 draws. So while he's a year older, he is somewhat fresher than Derwin. And as soon as Derwin's legs started to slow down, that's when you really saw Fernando laying into Derwin. Fernando being a mid-range to inside fighter. As soon as Derwin Ancajas' legs started to betray him, as soon as he started to slow down, that's as soon as Fernando Martinez started landing big shots. Derwin Ancajas, he showed a good chin. Good punch resistance, but Fernando Martinez is something akin to a Gatling gun. If you want to stay in the pocket with this guy, he's not going to stop throwing. He's not going to stop coming after you. He's a very strong, albeit limited puncher. That's what he is. Fernando Martinez is one of Marcos Maidana's fighters, one of Marcos Maidana's boys, IBF super flyweight champion. You know, Marcos can't keep him over there on PBC Island. They ain't got but so much for this guy to do, so much to offer him. We've already had the second fight with Derwin, and because Derwin was a champion going into the first fight, I get it, you know. You give the guy another shot, you run it back, give the guy the same shot that he gave you, give him a chance, and you gave him that chance, and now you've beat him for the second time, beat him decisively. What can the PBC offer Fernando Martinez now when most of the super flyweight action is happening on another side of the street? If Marcos wants to do what's best for his fighter, he needs to take him over there to Matchroom and DAZN. That's just reality. Yeah, he's got to take him to DAZN because Bam Rodriguez is there. Bam Rodriguez, WBC super flyweight champion. Bam's brother, Joshua Franco, he's the reigning WBA champion. 2 of the 4 world champions right there. There is Japan's own long-reigning WBO champion, Kazuto Ioka. To my knowledge, he has no affiliations or liaisons in this part of the world, but Gonzalez versus Estrada 3 is set to go down on that side of the street later on this year. And if you're a super flyweight, that is more or less where you want to be, where the action is. He stays on the PBC side of things. You know they might shelf this guy for a year before we see him again. What other super flyweights have they got for him to fight? What you're doing is sitting around waiting for a fight date from those people. You know, I don't know what Fernando's situation with the PBC is. I don't know if he's in a, according to Hoyle, Heyman fighter, or if he has the wiggle room, the liberty to shop himself around depending on where the fights are, where the opportunities are for a super flyweight champion. But I can tell you something, they're not on PBC Island. There's nobody else over there. There's no one for him to fight. He's beaten Derwin Ancajas for the second time. Now what? Now what are you going to do? My evaluation of Fernando Martinez's second victory over Derwin is, you know, it's not surprising. I figured he'd beat him for a second time. Fernando Martinez is a very entertaining fighter to watch. Very game, very strong, in keeping with the theme of strong Argentinian sluggers, strong Argentinian fighters. Fernando Martinez, he's yet another, but he's got his limitations, he's got his flaws. He was flustered by the movement from Derwin Ancajas early on. Mid-range to inside, you'll notice that Fernando, he stands a bit square. Gets it with the wrong shot, he could get caught off balance coming in, get sat on his back pocket. His punches are a bit wide, his punches are a bit wild. A fighter like a Bam Rodriguez, for example, who's got great feet and can cut angles, pivots and shifts.
Create blind spots.
A guy like that could give Fernando a lot of problems. I like the body attack from Fernando. That's what helped to take the legs away from Jerwin Ancajas. I like that.
I like that he was able to keep the pressure on, but he is one of these guys who compromises defense for offense.
Might have worked out with Jerwin Ancajas. It might have, but it's not going to work with everybody. It's not going to work with everybody else, particularly a fleet-of-foot fighter that can stay on the move for the entire duration of the match. So we'll see what's next for
Fernando Martinez, who just made the first successful defense of his IBF title. Congratulations to him.
We then come to the middleweight contest between the Dominican Republic's own Carlos Adames, the vastly improved Carlos Adames, and Juan Macias Montiel. Juan Montiel, who achieved some notoriety, some fame, some semblance of buzz for going the distance with reigning WBC middleweight champion Jermall Charlo. And I told you guys then,
You're not supposed to be waltzing around with a guy like this for 12 rounds. You're not.
not if you are what people say you are, not if you're supposed to be some kind of guy that Canelo Alvarez needs to avoid. No, sir. You're not going to be going the distance 12 rounds.
You're supposed to knock this guy out, man.
I felt and still feel it reflected poorly on Jermall Charlo that he wasn't able to get this guy out of there, that he wasn't able to finish this guy. Years ago, Jaime Munguia was able to finish him. More recently, last night, Carson, California, Carlos Adames was able to finish this guy.
So why couldn't Jermall Charlo?
You're always hearing about how hard a puncher he is. Well, he don't punch hard enough that he could finish Juan Macias Montiel. Let me tell you something.
Charlo sucks.
He sucks. He fucking sucks. He's a fucking hype job.
Charlo sucks.
Talk about the fight. Carlos Adames. He's a switch hitter. He can fight orthodox. He can fight southpaw. For this assignment, for this fight, he decided to come out boxing out of the southpaw stance, and it worked out for him. He was able to create angles.
His height and his length, his physical dimensions,
and holes in Juan Montiel's defense, he was able to capitalize. They got off to a slow start in the first round, and the crowd...
Not a lot happened in the first round, and the people over there in Carson, California, they let both these boys know how they felt about it. You need to pick it up, and that's what they did. In the second round,
before Carlos Adames was able to close the show in dramatic fashion in the third. And that's what's supposed to happen.
You're not still supposed to be here waltzing around the ring with a guy like this in the 12th round. No, you're supposed to kick this can down the road.
There were many who felt it necessary to try and explain away Jermall Charlo's lackluster showing against Juan Macias Montiel. Juan Macias Montiel, who not only went the distance with Jermall Charlo, but in spots, he was able to put the pause on him, and he didn't have any success against Carlos Adames.
He didn't have any of the same success with Carlos that he had with Jermall. Now try and understand.
Triangle theories don't work. Boxing math doesn't work like that. Because Carlos was able to dispatch Juan where Jermall could not, that doesn't necessarily mean that Carlos beats Jermall by default. It doesn't work like that, though. Carlos, he does have some of the right ingredients for that Jermall Charlo fight.
But it's not as simple as saying that because Carlos beat Juan better than Jermall did, Carlos beats Jermall. It's really not that simple. As a matter of fact, that's an oversimplification.
It's more because of what Carlos Adames does in the ring. What he did leading up to the knockout, fighting out of the southpaw stance. You know, Jermall Charlo, you know he don't like southpaws. Do you remember the Matvey Korobov fight? And how Matvey Korobov couldn't miss Jermall Charlo with the straight left hand.
You have to consider that not only is Carlos Adames an ambidextrous switch hitter,
he still packs a big punch from out of the southpaw stance.
Straight right hand or straight left hand, this guy can hurt you. And that's important.
It's important because Jermall Charlo is an orthodox fighter, and it's important because Jermall Charlo, he don't like southpaws. For whatever reason, this guy cannot defend against the straight left hand, the backhand of a fighter fighting out of the southpaw stance. And Carlos can do that.
Yeah, Jermall Charlo, one of Jermall Charlo's signature punches is his jab. You always hear about how great his fucking jab is.
Well, against a guy like Carlos Adames, with the height and the length of a Carlos Adames, the physical dimensions of a Carlos Adames, tacked on to him being able to switch hit, him being able to fight southpaw, he could make it hard for Jermall to land that jab, to set up that right hand if Carlos fights out of the southpaw stance. Stand just on the outside of that orthodox jab.
Countering with straight left. Straight left that he nailed Juan Macias Montiel with yesterday.
There's also Jamal Charlo's schedule of activity you must consider, rather his schedule of inactivity. This is a guy who only fought once in 2020, only fought once last year, hasn't fought at all this year. What will be the state of him if and when he's opposite the ring, Carlos Adames? On this kind of schedule, I gotta tell you, Carlos is gonna be the sharper fighter if Jamal Charlo don't get busy. I think a lot of people want to believe that Jamal Charlo is of a higher caliber, of a different ilk than a Carlos Adames, but he's not making it easier on himself, things going the way they're going. That he hasn't even fought this year, and this guy is his mandatory challenger. He's WBC interim champion.
And he's hungry.
He comes back a little better every single fight. He has effectively put distance between himself and his lone defeat to Brazil's own Patrick Teixeira several years ago.
It's not like the PBC are getting anything out of their investment in Jamal Charlo.
Doesn't want to move up to 168 pounds to take on David Benavidez. Hasn't had any super fights yet. This is a decent fight, a solid fight that they can make in-house with minimal issues and minimal resistance. So hopefully we see Adames versus Charlo at some point next year. We then come to the main event of that same card, the junior middleweight WBC interim title fight between Sebastian Fundora, the towering inferno, and Carlos Ocampo of Mexico. And for the first 3 rounds of this thing, you saw a change in Sebastian. He opted to box, use his length, use his height, use his jab.
And it's not Sebastian's calling card. It's not what he's become known for.
He's become known for the work that he does mid-range to inside, deep inside the pocket. For a statuesque, long, tall, rangy fighter,
Sebastian's really good in the pocket. Akin to what you used to see from Jarrett Hurd, mid-range to inside, the junior middleweight division's former unified champion. Sebastian Fundora is just as effective in the pocket as Jarrett Hurd was for the same reason. Physically imposing size and volume punching. Accurate in the phone booth. But it seems like they chose this fight to try some new things out, work on things, and for the first 3 rounds, you saw Sebastian boxing, using his height, his length, his jab to manage the distance and keep Carlos Ocampo at arm's length.
keep him out. And Sebastian did that for a while up until round 4. That's when you saw Sebastian's signature, his calling card. Mid-range to inside fighting, infighting in the phone booth.
And he really did get the better end of those exchanges. In the phone booth, Sebastian is most effective.
Though I won't begrudge him for choosing this fight and choosing this time to work on different areas and work on different things, because you want to do this now. You don't want to become limited to boxing mid-range to inside. You want to use all your tools. And Sebastian, he's got a lot to choose from.
He's got a lot to use.
It'd be a terrible tragedy for a fighter that has Sebastian's physical dimensions to not use those dimensions to his advantage, to develop and hone those skills.
So I don't begrudge him trying to show more of a jab and show a little bit more boxing as opposed to banging in the phone booth.
You don't want to become limited to that, the way that Willie Nelson was limited, Jarrett Hurd. These statuesque, physically imposing mid-range to inside fighters that had generous physical dimensions the same way that Sebastian has generous physical dimensions for this weight.
It did seem largely experimental what Sebastian was doing.
In the early goings of the fight, but he was all business after round 4. Mid-range to inside with the much smaller Carlos Ocampo, who's not a small junior middleweight per se, but everybody looks small next to Sebastian Fundora, who's what, 6'5", 6'6", with an 80-inch wingspan?
Sebastian showed the cleaner, clearer work mid-range to inside, deep in the pocket. Normally, the shorter fighter has the advantage there because the shorter fighter has shorter arms, but
normally the shorter fighter with the shorter arms can put punches together a lot faster in the pocket than the taller fighter can, because the taller fighter ain't got as much room to work, and he needs room to work because of those long arms. Sebastian, to his credit, he's very effective at that range, where most other taller fighters are flustered being so close to the other guy. Not Sebastian. He's right at home in the pocket, but that much we already knew.
There were several moments in this thing where Carlos Ocampo looked ready to go.
Several moments deep in the pocket where if Sebastian would have given himself a little bit more room, a little bit more real estate, create a bit of space to add torque to the punch, so when you throw it, you've got more leverage. There were several moments where it looked like Carlos Ocampo, if Sebastian lands clean, he can get him out of there.
Sebastian was smothering his work a bit, playing Carlos Ocampo so close to the chest.
I mean, Sebastian's good in the pocket, don't get me wrong, but a guy with those kinds of physical dimensions being being so close to the other guy, you're not really getting optimal leverage for your punches, being that close to the guy. What I think Sebastian struggles with is managing the distance, managing it safely.
You know, because if he gives the guy enough room, the guy might fire an overhand right. So rather than allowing him to do that, he crowds him.
He basically sells out. He collapses the pocket, leans on the guy, uses his size, and puts punches in there. Body shots, uppercuts, hooks around the guard, but as stated, because he has so much size,
punches don't have as much on them as they could have if he'd create a bit more space.
Let's say Sebastian Fundora. He has his virtues, but he also has his drawbacks. Ring savvy and ring IQ, that's one of his drawbacks. He's not getting the most out of his physically imposing size that he could be. I think he struggles to manage the distance, which is why he sells out so much. And it's very entertaining watching him bang in the booth with these guys, but you really don't want to be limited to doing that, not when you have other options. And that's what I think Sebastian and his team are working on. That's why I think he was boxing at the start of this thing.
Do you think he's ready for Jermell Charlo?
Rather, the winner of Charlo versus Zeus, set to go down early next year. Is today's Sebastian Fundora adequately prepared for the winner of that fight? The winner that I anticipate will be Jermell Charlo. And even if he wins, will Sebastian get him? Well, on the premise that he does, no. Here and now, I don't see a complete fighter. I don't see a fighter that's ready for Jermell Charlo, who's been around the block, been in there with some of the best and brightest fighters this division has to offer. He's seen a lot of base styles.
Pure boxers and moving targets like Austin Trout, Tony Harrison.
Boxer Puncher and Erickson Lubin, who he dispatched in just a single round, and a pressure fighter in Brian Castano, guy that he fought 2 times, guy who he figured out. Sebastian hasn't developed enough of a jab, a stiff stick, to really manage the distance against the naturally smaller fighter. Everybody's naturally smaller than Sebastian. He hasn't mastered that yet, so in all likelihood against Jermell, he'd sell out the way he always sells out. He'd try to crowd him, try to get mid-range to inside, get in that guy's wheelhouse, get in that guy's chest, and he'd come under heavy fire trying to do that. That's what Brian Castano did, and I understand that Brian Castano is a lot smaller. He's a smaller target than Sebastian Fundora, but that's the point.
In the second fight, in their rematch earlier this year, he was able to adequately time Brian Castano's entry, catch him coming in, trying to come through the front door.
Staying a moving target, I think Jermell Charlo compared to Sebastian. Jermell shows a better jab, shows more variety of punches than Sebastian, and he's certainly more experienced. He's been around the block with the best and brightest fighters at this weight. So if what you're asking me...
The question is Sebastian Fundora ready for Jermell Charlo?
No, I don't think he is. I don't think so.
I remembered what he looked like with Sergio Garcia. Yesterday, he didn't knock out Carlos Ocampo.
I don't get the sense he can knock out a Jermell Charlo. I understand that he beat the brakes off of Erickson Lubin, but I said he was going to beat the brakes off of Erickson Lubin because Erickson don't take the best punch. My opinion.
Sebastian's not ready for Jermell.